Hello, 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 and welcome to another Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation's Young Lions Jazz Master virtual sessions. I am your guest host, Michael Kernodle, and today you have a special treat. We have none other than our guest educator, Tyler Wertman. I call him the professor, but his topic today is developing slide techniques. So all you trombone players, all trombonists, come on in the room today. We're going to talk about something that's vital as far as your development with the slide technique. I want to remind you, as you come in, if you have any questions, you hear something special during the presentation and you want to ask a question, just go into the chat feature and type it in. And we're going to leave some time at the end where we can answer all questions. I just want to thank our sponsors and say, be sure to check out the studio archives of past video sessions at clearwaterjazz.com, education outreach section. That's brought to you by our friends over there at Blue Water Wealth Management at Stewart Partners and Duke Energy, as well as check out the Young Lions podcast wherever you stream. And that's brought to you by our friends at Marine Max Clearwater. And you can just search Young Lions Jazz Master virtual sessions wherever you stream. I mean, what can I say about Tyler? I mean, he's had so many great past sessions here with Clearwater Jazz. I mean, just to name a few: an approach to improvisation on the trombone. That was awesome. Learning to develop your own personal sound on trombone. How many people know tone is very important? I know that. You should too. Or maybe this basic trombone fundamentals. He's done plenty of those, from tongue and articulation, long tones, lip slurs, you name it. Go in the archives, check him out. And if you don't know about this awesome educator, he is a jazz trombonist. And he also has worked with us with the Young Lions virtual sessions and My Journey with Jazz programs. If you haven't seen that in the community, it is definitely a treat. He's a composer, performer, producer. He focuses on jazz and classical styles. He's performed with many ensembles that have taken him all over. Currently, Tyler is an instructor of music at the University of Tampa, where he's presently teaching Introduction to Jazz as well as world music cultures. Awesome. He received his Bachelor's of Arts from none other than FSU, that's Florida State University, and he has his Master's in Music and Jazz Studies from the University of South Florida. So without any further ado, Tyler Wertman, the professor, the stage is all yours.
Mr. Kernodle, thank you so much. Clearwater Jazz, our sponsors, really enjoy being here and getting to approach instrumentalists, trombonists, and musicians alike with just information that I've learned across the way here for free, like you're saying. This is such a wonderful opportunity for everyone. And so today's lesson plan is going to be around developing slide technique. I've seen quite a few up-and-coming trombonists, that do practice their scales, and they practice their range and their flexibility and this and that, and it's all great. But something I see that's holding a lot of them back is just the movement in their extremities when they're playing the trombone. Okay. And so some of that movement that I see, it's very stiff. It's very jerky. We want to be playing the trombone as if it's very, very fluid. For instance, if we're holding the trombone slide, something we don't want to do, which I see a lot of students do, is they might hold it very aggressively. Okay. You don't need to hold the trombone slide like you're holding on for dear life. A couple things that might lead to this is having a poor having poor maintenance in your slide. And so by not having, the proper tools, a spray bottle, slide grease, an oil, something of sorts, it's going to be a lot more difficult to play our instrument without even getting a sound out. Okay, and so we want to make this thing our friend. How do we do that? We make sure the trombone is kept in great and peak condition. Same with any instrument, really. You don't want to be fighting your instrument. That's one more thing that you have to deal with when playing. And so, but what I mean by holding the slide aggressively is in a fist, right? They might just be holding it very tightly. And when they move the slide, it's not a movement found in the hand or fingers. It's found in almost the entire arm. You'll see. The whole arm, and that's just one half step. That's one slide position. Okay, so you can imagine when guys are really playing, it's this jerky movement. Okay, and it's really hard to play, something smooth like this. For instance. A-flat pentatonic scale, for instance. There's some intervallic movement in that. It's not all necessarily chromatic. So we need to approach that in a smooth way. And if you noticed how jerky I was, because I was not moving my wrist or fingers or hand at all. The majority of my movement came from my shoulder. Okay, that is not good. Instead, try to manipulate the wrist, okay, by twisting it. A lot of players that play very stiff have their wrist twisted up, okay, instead of twisted out of the belt, okay, or should I say twisted, towards the side when they're playing very stiff. Now, if you rotate it just 45 degrees and have the face of your knuckles facing the bell, you're now able to play and throw the slide when you couldn't do that necessarily from this angle. Okay, I hope I'm making sense to some trombone players here. And this is all found in your muscle memory. These are things that you might not be thinking about when you're playing. Okay, but if you can take the time and focus and practice, then they will lead you to having a smoother slide movement, which in turn will smoothen out your articulations, which in turn will produce better facility on your instrument. Okay, so that's my biggest tip so far, guys. It's just rotating that wrist, okay, outward towards the bell. So instead of, twisting it in, to and so honestly, the second time was a lot easier for me to play because my slide wasn't starting and stopping and going so aggressively, right? So it's all about being as smooth as possible. Now, something else that can also aid is by practicing just chromatic notes in this method. Okay, now I was practicing with scales, which in turn, right, is just, practice that we'll be doing when we're playing, et cetera, et cetera. But when you sit down and you warm up and you do your long tones and you do your lip slurs and tonguing exercises, this is the time where you should be really focused on your technique. How am I holding the slide? Am I getting as smooth, of a wrist as possible? Because then from here, you can work towards your scales to, excerpts you're playing or pieces in your bands. Excuse me. So one technique that I like to practice is just 4 chromatic notes, starting from first position down to 4th position. And the goal of this practice is not to move our shoulder, not to move our elbow, and not to move our forearm at all. The only thing that should be moving here are the wrist, the hand, and the fingers. Okay, those are the your 3 movement points. Okay, but notice the forearm doesn't move, and you need to be able to sort of have this throw with your hand so that you don't have to be, like I said, jerking around, so to speak, just to play for slide positions. So again, I'll show you the incorrect or more difficult technique with our wrist turned up. Okay. And this is just 4 chromatic notes. You can pick a comfortable partial for you, either B flats or an F partial, a D partial, something that's comfortable. And again, I would recommend practicing with a staccato note, open air release, and really try to focus on matching not only your note lengths, but the weight of the note as well as we're going across. Okay, so I'm going to start on the B flat on top of our bass clef staff, and I'm going to go B flat, A flat, and G. Okay, and so this is the more difficult, incorrect technique. Now, if you notice how much my arm already moved, okay, now I'm going to play with my wrist out facing the bell and try not to move my form. Try again. So the movement is from in to out, to in to out, opposed to you can already see it already looks like I'm sawing logs compared to just the movement that was happening before. So this slide movement is going to help us in many ways, guys, by especially in improvising with solos in jazz. When you arpeggiate, okay, when we perform enclosures, chromatic things on the trombone, for instance, something like an enclosure to the third. I'm throwing the slide. I'm not. And so I'll try to play it with the slide pointed up, and then I'll play it with the slide out. Hopefully you can hear just a stylistic change just in how my wrist was angled, excuse me. So by having it out, it's a lot more accessible to what your articulation is doing, right? It's all about matching that movement of the slide to the articulation to get a clean note. Okay, a lot of times I hear students play with a very, very heavy tongue, right? So heavy that you can almost hear it instead of the note that's coming out. And again, we want to be working, not as hard as possible here. We want to be taking things as easy as we can. And so by doing that, that involves things, like a light tongue to get our articulation to speak, a fast slide, or a dancing slide, as a lot of educators say. You want to see that movement in the slide of what you're playing, not necessarily your hand movement, but your slide movement, right? And so by having that quick movement of your slide and your articulations being as light as possible, you're able to then play enclosures, lines, arpeggios, things that maybe a saxophone or piano player might be performing. And if you're transcribing other instruments, this is a bit more advanced, this is going to help you out as well, especially if we're doing studies of Charlie Parker, things like this. You're going to have a smooth slide in order just to approach some of these heads, right? Confirmation, things like this. It requires a smooth wrist and a smooth slide and understanding of both. And so by developing your slide movement, okay, it will increase your facility on your instrument. And there's simple ways to do this. Again, having as light of an articulation as possible with a very melodic slide, as well as having your wrist, being pointed outward when you're playing the trombone, so that it allows you to throw the slide. Okay. And also not gripping the slide so hard. You really want to be gripping your slide as if you're holding a marshmallow, a pretty big marshmallow in your fingers. Okay. And you do not want to depress the marshmallow in. You want to have it keep its shape as you're throwing it out. Okay. You're holding the marshmallow, but you're not squeezing it, so to speak. It's there. Okay. And then you will find that bounce between the slide and your wrist movement. And then that in turn will go with your articulation, and you will then begin to line things up even cleaner than what you were prior. And just by focusing on these things, guys, in the warm-up rooms, okay, it's going to help you down the road. I promise. Mike, have you ever tried any of those techniques? Maybe the light tongue?
Well, yeah, I've seen the light tongue being very helpful. I've sat in auditions before, and I've heard students, they had great technique with the slide, but just the tonguing made everything not good, not pleasing to the ear. And it could be just a small little fix, I noticed, and on the other side, I've seen some players will have great tone, but they really struggle with that wrist. And, trombone is such a physical instrument. Those elements have to be right on it to get that desired result that you're looking for. Would you say? Would you agree?
Yeah, no. And that's the whole goal, is to have a sound of your specific note, B flat F, or scoop into a certain note, or whatever, and getting that sound onto, right, or to come out of your instrument. What is that going to require? And everyone is different with how they, maybe approach their air, their tongue, for instance. And there's things we can relate to get those things happening, but it's really up to that individual to hear that pitch, that sound, and then to play it with as high of an accuracy as possible.
Yeah, and those factors, they're so very important. With range, we always talk about high range, what helps you get that low range? I know we're coming out of just the technique of the wrist, but what would you say helps those even brass players or just trombone players get a nice, full, fat, low range?
Yeah, man. To me, and I've heard this growing up, and I still do. If you have a great sounding low range, you are going to have a great sounding upper register, and they're the same, right? And actually, it's tougher, in my opinion, to get a warm sounding open low range than it might be to do the opposite, right? And so some things I would definitely focus on is being comfortable down there. Don't be afraid to play down there, whether it's in your warm-ups or in your scale exercises. Okay, that's the one tip I will give, is if students are practicing their scales, they need to be practicing them from the lowest note of their instrument. And now by doing that, it gives them a different starting point to perform the scale, and also a different point for their ears to catch on to their harmonic, sequence of where they're at. For instance, if we're playing B flat major, or maybe even something different, like E flat major. Okay. For me, that lowest note on my instrument on this tenor trombone would be a concert F, right? Which is the 2, which is a very different spot to start off with. But if we're then playing, up through that low octave into the next, it might give you a different key center to hear, which would be your Dorian mode here, which would be F minor. You would be, approaching E flat from F minor. Where do you do that? Well, into 5 ones, right? Found in your turnarounds. So there's things that you can practice in your warm-ups that will apply to your improvisation and et cetera down the road. It's all about finding those and understanding those.
That's some awesome tips that you're giving us today, Tyler. I really enjoyed this session. And, I play multiple instruments, but, when you get to see other people, the techniques and the tips that they use to be great, that is awesome. And speaking of that, if you like more of these type of sessions, you can always go to our archives. Just go to our website, www.clearwaterjazz.com/education. And you can check out archives of many, many, many sessions just like this that gives us techniques, or maybe you like jazz history, or you want to know more about the music makers. There's so many things that's in there. And how about if you want to give us a suggestion of a topic, maybe for the future, we would love to hear that, or your feedback. Just email us at info@clearwaterjazz.com, and we would love to hear from you. So, Professor, it's been an awesome day with you so far. And as we always say, keep it swinging, everybody. I'm your guest host, Michael Kernodle. This has been Tyler Wertman, and we've enjoyed spending some time with you today, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.